The history of this phenomenon, which has terrified British drivers for over 100 years, began in 1911 and continues to this day. The phenomenon covers one particular road with the modern number B3212, which starts at two bridges near the town of Postbridge in the Dartmoor region. The phenomenon is called hairy hands. The phenomenon is that in these places, on different sections of the B3212 road, drivers sometimes suddenly see other people's large hairy hands covering the steering wheel of their car and try to throw the vehicle to the side of the road, which once led to tragic consequences. The hands were described as ghostly or disembodied, and the drivers themselves could not interfere with them in any way. Drivers later described these hands with horror in their voices. However, until 1921, this phenomenon was considered quite harmless and something akin to superstition, until the first tragedy occurred in 1921. In June 1921, Dr. Helby, who was working in the medical office of Dartmoor Prison, crashed to his death after losing control of his motorcycle with a sidecar in which two of his children were sitting out of the blue. Before he was thrown from the motorcycle and died, he managed to shout to the children to jump out of the stroller to save themselves. Later in the same year, 1921, on August 24th, a young British Army captain who was considered quite an experienced driver in the same area of the same road also lost control of his motorcycle. Fortunately, he managed to survive, and in a statement to the press, he told the shocking details of the accident. "It wasn't my fault. Believe it or not, something was trying to push my bike off the road, and I could see it as clearly as any other day. Those hairy, big, muscular arms. I fought them for the right to drive, but they were much stronger than me, and they still pushed my bike to the side of the road in the grass. When I came to, I was lying on the side of the road next to the motorcycle." In the summer of 1924, respected folk collector Theo Brown, author of Devon Ghosts and Family Holidays around Dartmoor, decided to camp half a mile from the sinister road. She said that that night she also witnessed the appearance of sinister, ghostly, hairy hands. At first, she felt something threatening near her, and then she noticed something moving in the small window of her trailer. She looked at the palm with its thumbs and thick hair on the fingers. The trailer window was slightly ajar, and those fingers were scratching at the window as if trying to get in. I felt that it wanted to harm my husband, who was sleeping in that direction. I also felt that it was very angry and hated us. I knew that it was an unusual hand, and that if we fought it, we wouldn't be able to do anything against it. However, Theo Brown found a way out when she crossed herself and began to pray to herself. The hand then crawled down the glass and disappeared. The rest of the night passed quietly, and so did the nights that followed. Mrs. Brown and her husband stayed there for several weeks, and the hairy fingers never bothered them again. Another story about hairy hands came from the author of the book Supernatural Dartmoor, Paranormal Dartmoor, Michael Williams. He told journalist Rufus Endell that one day he was driving a car past Postbridge, and suddenly, a couple of strange hands took over the control of the car. Williams was forced to fight with his hairy hands behind the wheel and barely managed to avoid a collision with another car. He was so horrified by what had happened that he asked the journalist to publish the story in the newspaper only after his death. Subsequently, there was a very long hiatus, and hairy hands were not seen on the B3212 road in Dartmoor for many decades. Or they didn't tell anyone about it. The next story after Williams with hands is dated back to 2008. It happened on January 12th, 2008. The driver, Michael Anthony, was driving home after meeting with regular customers. In those years, he worked for a company that supplies photocopies to British offices and traveled around the country a lot. It was late in the evening, at about 11 o'clock, when Anthony was heading down the road to Bristol. But as soon as he was out of Postbridge, A strange state of unreasoning fear and anxiety came over him. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine and that he was going to get home safely to his wife and children. But then suddenly, it all happened, and happened for about 2 minutes, leaving behind a feeling of something very dark and sinister. At first, Anthony felt his fingers begin to go numb, and it even flashed through his head that he was about to have a stroke. But it wasn't a stroke, it was much worse. Horrified by what was happening, Anthony watched as 2 alien hands, huge and hairy, appeared over his hands on the steering wheel, and they turned the steering wheel sharply, intending to push the car to the side of the road. Anthony struggled to resist and 3 times repelled an attempt to throw his car off the road. After the 3rd unsuccessful attempt, the hairy hands quickly began to disappear into thin air and disappeared, and a shocked Anthony stopped his car only when he reached the service station on the M5 motorway.